Okay, great. Hey everybody. So let's kickstart the today's session. So first of all, that's really pity that I didn't manage to contact the workshop yesterday just because I had a busy workload and didn't feel well. So hope today, today we could accommodate what we've planned for yesterday. So. Uh, First, before we start, let's discuss a couple of things. So first, um, you might be noticed that we removed the task reviews from the schedule, but don't worry, nothing happens in terms of what we plan for the course. Instead, we're going to accomplish two things at the time on the workshops. So first, we'll go to review the previous task that you accomplished last time, and then we could proceed to the actual workshop that covers the next topic. So don't worry, the task review will be, but as a part of the workshop. Unfortunately, we do not have enough people to conduct webinars, so let's keep it as the following. But don't worry, we will review all the tasks that you prepared. Then second one, last time I told that needs to wait a bit more before we start distribution among mentors. Uh, just want to not let you know, so why we're keeping too long. First, we want to ensure that all of the students that registered the course actually wants to come further. That's why we're waiting for accomplishing the first task, and then the active students that's making the progress will be distributed among the mentors. Um, so just because not to waste the time of mentors by distributing a student who registered by mistake or just changed his mind in accomplishing the course. So don't worry, will not leave anyone without a mentor. But however, still, if you see that you haven't undistributed among the mentors, so please, I encourage you to ask all the Angular related questions either in the chat, or if you are waiting of especially the answer from my end, I would encourage you to ping me by tagging my name in all of the channels provided, or you could simply just contact me in DM in private messages, so I could also try to help you. Okay, so I believe we agreed. And before proceeding, I would like to ask you, do you have any questions in terms of course, in terms of the topics given this week, or whatever that it bothers you right now? So I believe we can discuss it now before proceeding. Now, by the way, don't hesitate to unmute and speak with me, and especially on workshops, that's highly recommended that you could stop me at any moment to give a comments or hints. Active participation is highly welcome. 1, 2, 3. So, okay. If nothing to discuss right now, so you still can leave a message to me in the chat, so I could address it later on. Okay, so let's review what we have for the current week. So we're covered some intro topics as well as components, directives, and pipes. So the intention of the workshop is to write something little, but which will cover all the topics that accomplished this week. So that you could see in practice how we're going to deal with the given building blocks that we accomplished this week. And also, like I asked you on the intro whether you have any ideas what we're going to write on workshops. Unfortunately, I didn't receive anything, so my proposal is to do the following. So maybe some of you already noticed that I have the momentum tab opened. So yeah, that's will be our scope for further workshops. So let's build our clone of the momentum extension. So I believe that could be great to present how to work with the building blocks. So I didn't prepare the repository for the code just to ensure that you get all the ideas. So how to kickstart with the Angular, how to proceed with generating components. So just ensure that we are on the same page. So let's do that. So just in case if you don't quite familiar with momentum, so we don't have much logic here. So it's quite simple Chrome extension that shows you the current time. It has the time-based greeting based on your name, and then a small to-do list that is attached to the bottom so that you could track the progress, as well as specifying the current today's focus. So that's one simple item. So that's the simple to-do list with a little of enhancements. However, at least for today, we're not going to focus on the lookup field too much. So we'll just focus on the functionality that needs to be implemented. Um, Before I start, just one more time, please feel free to stop me at any moment without waiting for my request to ask the question. In case if you have anything to ask or to highlight, so that we could spend our time in productive way. So then let's kickstart then. Uh, I'm going to create the new Angular app. Then just to review one more time to ensure that you're already aware of the steps. So first things, it prompts me to include Angular routing. By default, it's no, but I would encourage to hit yes, just because it will include the necessary files for routing that could be helpful in the future. So we're going to hit yes. Then it prompts us to select the style sheet format. In the vast majority of Angular project, the SCSS is used, so let's go with it. And then it's installing the all the necessary dependencies. And while it's installing, so let's go right to the IDE. It's have already generated it for us. And let's wait for the process to finish, and then we could kickstart. Okay. It takes some time, but we have it. So let's go forward. Okay, so you're already familiar with the project structure. If I'm not mistaken, I also covered such topic on lecture recording. So we are not going to get too deeper into details. So here, yeah, that's our entry point. This is our root component, which is going to clean up whatever we have here. So that's we could kickstart with writing what we plan for today. Okay, so maybe we'll not go to create the components right away. So instead, we could focus on the logic right now, and at least later on we can see how can we distribute it's among our parts. One more thing to include, at least on your YouTube client application, you're free to use any of the UI frameworks, and as you perhaps already got, so I encourage you to use Angular Material just because it's maintained by the same developers that updates Angular. It has the native support, as well as it's fully compatible with the current version. So let's go further with it. So actually, it's quite simple. All we need is to run the ngCli command, but maybe I too hurried up with uh, running the application. So perhaps, oh, maybe I will do also one thing. Perhaps you don't see too much from the screen sharing, so I made font a bit bigger for you. Okay, so now we're going to include the material for us. Uh, so here it prompts us to select the theme for our future app. So we could go with one of them, and we also have possibility to extend or to customize it depending on your color scheme. The documentation is available on the Angular material website. So let's select maybe the purple amber, set up global material typography styles with the rest ones. So we could like keep it as is. So no major changes required. And then we see that it includes some of the dependencies into app module. By the way, so not sure whether I already covered the what the module is, especially the Angular module, but it consists of several sections. So first is declarations, which is the listing of the components generated, imports. It's for including other ng modules into your app. So here we see a bunch of modules already included. So then once we install the Angular material, so okay, so let's run it, and then we're going right next to the actual implementation. So first, our goal is to create such screen where the current time has printed. It has the type-based greeting and the input for our main focus. And on other screens, we'll also have the to-do list as here. So let's kickstart with the smaller things. So let's prompt a user to enter his name. That's quite simple. Okay, and we're going right to include the material components. So we already has it for the input. So let's go forward. For instance, we need the form input from the material, right? So how we're going to include this component into our app. So first we could give it a try to see how it actually looks like. And then there is the API tab, which includes the necessary import that needs to be included because all of the components are in the separate material imports. So to make it work, we'll have to import all this stuff. So now we need to have the import our material input that's will be included later on. So let's do it right away. And then we could include our import component into our application. So here we click overview, then view code, and here how it looks like. Okay, so we have some sort of form. Okay, so since for right now we're dealing with the single component, so at least we could kickstart with it. So we do not need the text area, which could be removed. And then let's do something like the following. So let's enter your name. Okay, and let's see what we have in our app. Okay, so for our convenience, perhaps the layout should be a bit aligned. So perhaps let's do some modifications to the styles. So actually, yeah, each of the styles will be related to the particular component, but the rules is the same as you write regular styles in the CSS. So, and I hope that you're already familiar with SAS and SCSS syntax is the same. It's CSS compatible, and at the same time, it provides a bit more features for you. So it's highly recommended to use pre-processing for styles. So okay, let's do something like and something like the following. So just align it as the center for our convenience. Okay, so here is our input field, and we need to enter our name here so that it will be displayed later on within another component. So how we're going to deal with entering the name. So I saw the question in the Discord, not sure on which of the channels, but the question was, there are two types of Angular forms. What is the difference between them and which I encountered to use? Well, that's actually not the scope for now. But if you want to take a closer look, in Angular, there are two types of forms. First is template-driven, and second one is reactive. In the examples, in the intro lecture, I used template-driven form, but one of the modules for the current course will also cover reactive forms. The second one is widely used across the production projects. For now, for simplicity, let's go with template driven. So not going to get deeper into this topic because it's already covered. But our goal now is to read the value that we just typed right here. And to do so, we need some sort of binding. So perhaps you already familiar with bindings and the purpose of them. And we have actually three types of them. First is property binding. We could bind and simply what is the property binding? So we can pass anything to an element property. It could be any built-in attribute like inner HTML or something enabled for buttons. So it supports any of the attributes that exist in for the DOM elements. So the next one is output binding, which actually without explicitly attaching the event listener will help us to create a listener in the form of output binding. For instance, for form elements, we have the event called submit, and then something should happen. Okay, but first things first, to continue working with forms, we need to separate module. Okay, something wrong with my IDE because doesn't highlight me anything. Okay, just for us to memorize, we need forms module to be included into our main one. Okay, then, so perhaps we want to listen to any of the changes occurred to our input. So the simplest solution here is to use template-driven form. To do so, we want to include the name, which is string. It's haven't been initialized, but that's okay. We can do this one. And then we need ng model, which represents two-way binding. So it works in the following way. So first, input will receive the value from the property of the class, and whenever the input has been changed, it will write the value to the property instance name. And since we're dealing with template-driven forms, so we also want to include the attribute name, because otherwise it will not work. Okay, now so we need some kind of button. We could also refer to the Angular material documentation to pick one of them. Don't forget to import one of the modules. So we need material button module to be included right here. And then we want to pick up something from here. At least basic should be enough. So it includes the necessary attributes. So that simply will be submit. And since we're dealing with form submitting, we want to also to include type submit. Okay, so now we write our value to the name, and then we want something happening upon clicking the submit button. So let's create the new method called submit username. It will accept nothing just because we do not need anything from the event. Then upon submitting, we need to show the section with displaying the time, greeting, and today's focus. Okay, so let's do that. Right now, we need some sort of indicator that will indicate us that we actually submitted the form. Something like that. And now, upon clicking, we want to see another content. Which will be displayed only when we enter the username. To do so, I hope you're already familiar with ngIf tag, ngIf attribute directive. By the way, that's one of the commonly used. The star, the asterisk of the name of the directive indicate that this is the structural directive. What does it mean? So if you remember, there are two types of directives. This one is structural, and this one, mod button, is attribute directive. The difference is that the attribute directive attaches to the existing element and changes its look and feel, or perhaps give it extra logic, extra behavior. Other than structural directive, first it will transform in something like the following. So before you use the element or trigger it, it will create ng template tag for you, which actually, what does it mean, ng template? So that's a piece of markup that is not displaying right now before we requested to display the ng template. And then here is the condition. And only when the condition will be true, this template will be visible. So I believe that's for now it's okay. So we have the condition called username submitted, and then we want to include greeting here. So here we'll have displaying the time, then the name, and something coming here. So let's achieve displaying our current name and the current time as well. So with the time, it's quite simple since we can just create the date object and then transform it using one of the pre-built pipes called date. And there are lots of the formats which can be transformed, except the fact that perhaps we want the date to be the time updated each I don't know, each second, for example. Because whenever we create the date object, it will remain the same and the time will not be updated. So perhaps we want to include something that will update our current time, for example. To do so, let's do the following. We want to include current date, which is date object. And we want to initialize some sort of interval. So because we are not familiar with React.js right now, so we're going to include the simple solution. Here we come to the lifecycle hooks of the components. There are several of them. Perhaps ng-on-init is one of the most commonly used lifecycle hooks, but just in case, let's bring you some understanding of what is the difference. Why do we need ng-on-init, even though the component has a constructor that also triggers only once, but still, why do we need the separate lifecycle hook for that? So that's not because we get used to it. So actually, there is one simple reason for doing so. I hope you're already familiar with input bindings. So to create a new input binding that will be passed to the component, we use input decorator, then use property with some type, right? But actually, the input bindings are not getting resolved immediately. And if we try to access it within the constructor, we will not get anything because the input bindings hasn't been initialized yet. We got, well, actually, honestly, I don't quite remember what we got in return, but I presume that will be undefined. But in any case, we will not be able to access the input binding because it hasn't been initialized. However, if we'll use ng-on-init, we could access it without any issues. So I believe you got the idea. By the way, before on init, we got also on changes. That's the first lifecycle hook of the Angular, which comes right after constructor. I will do it like the following without importing because we will not need it. And here, that's exactly the sequence of calling the hook. So first we call constructor, then ng-on changes, and ng-on init. ng-on changes will be called each time whenever we change something in the input bindings, and the purpose of it to initialize the input bindings. So we could also access this property here. So if you want your component to react to each of the changes that comes to the input binding, so ng-on changes, it will be your rescue. So in our purpose, we'll only need the ng-on-init hook, since we're dealing for now with that component, and then we'll be thinking on how to decompose it. So we want here, to create the date, create the date object each time. Perhaps we can also do the following. And whenever on each interval tick, we also want to update the current date as well, because it will update the time. Okay, and then we want to print the time right here. So how we're going to include our properties to print it in the HTML? So we need interpolation. There is the syntax with two rounding braces. That's actually will access the value of the component property and print its string. So now we have current date to be transformed to something, because right now it will look, it will not work. Okay, so because we haven't bound the output property of the form, so we haven't even submitted our form. So we need to bind the submit event and call submit username. And then we could see what we have. Okay, so we have so simple. If what we see right now is quite simple. So if we call new date and then to string, it will result in the same. So as you can see, the interpolation works as toString method to display the text on the HTML page. But we need to prettify it somehow, and we want to include some sort of the pipe. We have the date pipe built in Angular, so we can use it right away. So perhaps short time should be enough. Short time, which is right here. So to use it, to use a pipe, simply we include pipe symbol, then specify date. It will transform our date object into another value. And to provide an argument, simply include, it's like the following. Or even better, let it be medium time to include seconds. Okay, so now we see we have current time here, and then we need to access, we need a time-based greeting. As we can see here, there is good morning. So we also want to see good evening and good afternoon. So perhaps we can do that right into the component. However, there is a better solution here. So why don't we use our custom pipe to get the personal greeting? So I propose to do like the following. So by the way, in the first task, whenever you'll be dealing with it, you also need to create a component. And in our case, the structure will be quite simple. Since right now we're dealing with one single module, so we're going to have the directories right inside the app folder. It will be components, directives, then pipes. Not sure whether it's the same in the task, but the idea is like the following, and models. Models will include, okay, maybe you don't see too much, so let me not sure how to enlarge it, but I hope it's visible somehow. So we included components, directives, pipes, folders, as well as modules, and perhaps we need some constants as well. And basically, when you will create another modules, the structure will be the same for all of them. So right now, let's include a new pipe. I'm going to generate it right away. Time greeting. That will be our pipe. And whenever we generated a new pipe, it includes into the declarations right away. So, okay. Actually, pipe is quite simple. It's a simple function that takes some value as an input parameter, and it also accepts arguments. Arguments could be passed by the following way. So in the date pipe, which is built in, we included one argument. We could make our pipe to accept multiple arguments by using REST operator. That's quite possible. For now, we do not need any of the arguments. So we accept string, and in return, we'll get string. Then possibly we will not get the string because we will use it in the next line. So let's accept date object and return string. To do so, well, perhaps the solution will not be ideal. It will be straightforward, but that just to save our time. Maybe let's rename it something like the following: date get hours. Okay, and then okay, the solution will be straightforward. Quite straightforward. If hours be less than 12, then we'll return good morning. If greater than or equals 12, and less than, I don't know, 17, good, we return good afternoon. Otherwise, it will be good evening. Okay, for now, that should be enough. Okay, and now we want to print our greeting right here. So we still use the current date here. And then we want to transform using the pipe name. It will be time greeting. And let's see what we have here. Good evening. Exactly what we expected. And also to interpolate our current username. Okay, so looks good. The only thing I would do here is perhaps we need to save the entered name to local storage so that we will not require to enter the name each time. So perhaps we can do that. So just in case, you'll cover the services next week, but that's the great candidate to be moved to a separate building block called services. The service, to put it simply, are the helper classes that could contain the business logic or some core logic related to other APIs. And local storage manipulation will be the great candidate to move here. So whenever we enter the, so first we would like, maybe we could either include to do, move. For now, let's keep it as this. So we want to get some item. We also want to include the key name, something like that. That will be our local storage key. If it exists, then our entered name will be the same, and we indicate that our name has been submitted, just to show exact, to jump right into the second screen. And whenever we're submitting a username, we want to save it to the local storage. This will be entered name. Aha, because string and undefined. So for now, we haven't initialized it because we included the question mark. So question mark is from optional chaining, because if we don't include it right now, it will raise, by default, it will raise in the error that the property has no initializer and not assigned to a constructor. But okay, we can include the empty string here and see what we have. Okay, we submitted Pavel. And whenever we refresh the page, it still goes with the same. It's include the time, the personal greetings. So for now, so far so good. Okay. Maybe we could include some sort of to-do list here. Okay. So instead of having the today's, okay, either we could include the today focus or the to-do list. Maybe for simplicity, let's go with the to-do list. For such purpose, I need to include another material component. So by the way, please do not hesitate to stop me at any moment to ask something if you have anything to ask, or give a comments. So the participation is highly welcome. So now, okay, let's include a card with entered to items. That also could be accomplished within a section. So let's maybe include the card. So I believe we can go with material card. Oops, here. And here we want to include the material card right here, which will be the listing of our items. And here we want also to include another form for entering the to-do item. Well, as you see, that already comes complicated to maintain, just because we have only one single component that accumulates all the logic. So it has responsibility for entering a username, for displaying the greeting, and now we also give him the logic for dealing with to-do list, which is not quite good in our case. So let's finalize the let's finalize the logic, and then we could think how can we move it separately. So first we need to have something for to do. That will be our need to do item. Then our to do items actually will have it's not a simple string, it's an object. An object that consists of at least two properties. First, we would like to indicate the progress on it, and then the actual title. So that's would be quite complex without knowing the exact structure of it, and that's why one of the scope of the task this week is to create the interfaces or models for dealing with the entities. So by the way, if you notice that I also stick to the same naming convention, I also include like the type of the entity I create. I created the file called delete.model.js. So everything that's inside the models have the same suffix model, or whatever I will create in constants will also will have the constants here. So actually that's not necessary to stick with the same approach, but since all the Angular building blocks follows the same approach as here, so why don't we stick with it as well? So here is our interface. So don't remember whether I covered the difference between the class and the interface. So actually the class also describes how the entity will look like. But the main difference is we will not be able to create the instance out of the interface. And the class could include some methods implemented, or we could also extend, as well as the interfaces. For simplicity, let's stick with the second one. Okay, let's see. Constant directory. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I included it in the components. Yeah, thanks for noticing. Well, that's not a problem. It will have ID, just to refer to it properly, then title, and is completed. That's our simple model. And then inside a constant, just for simplicity, I want to include some data. So it will be the type of the array. Array will consist of to-do model. The empty array is also good. So here we want to include a bunch of objects, and having the TypeScript is also great in terms of when you are not quite familiar with the object and it has the highlighting of the properties that could be used here. So let's include title. And let's include a bunch of other items. Demo, and then read the facts, for instance. That will be completed. Okay, so we're good to go further. We created a bunch of a bunch of items. Then we want to include right here. Okay, that's things goes interesting. I haven't included export. Let's see. Uh, will be the possibility to clone this project somehow? Yes, definitely. I will upload it to the GitHub right away. Then what do you prefer, interface instead of type in this case? So let me explain what's going on here. So the type, if you mean the following one, the type alias, which they call the type alias. So in the type alias, we can include a bunch of, we can unite the existing types, for instance, or create a shorthand of string types, but that's not our case. So just for you, so we can refer to the TypeScript documentation. So if you're talking about this one, that's called the type alias, which actually is, well, that's not quite designed for describing actually the structure of our entity. Instead, we could do some union types or any other complex ones in case if we have some specific scenarios. Okay, so you could refer to this page in case if you want to learn more. I will leave it in the chat. Yeah, so exactly now I see that you meant the type alias. And so here is the description and also comparison between interfaces. So if you're interested in that, so just not to take the time right now, but in case if you see it's not clear for you, so we can pick up later on. So yeah, we could achieve the same with the type aliases, but in the production variants, it's mostly used just to create some union types or the complex ones. And also one of the possible case scenarios, for example, let's give it. Let's assume our to-do item will have not just two statuses like completed or not completed, like Boolean, right? What if we want to have multiple statuses, like in, I don't know, like in progress, waiting for something? Let's have three statuses. And there are two ways how can we achieve that. Either we create the constant object for that, constant strings, like having the following. Like in progress. You got the idea, right? So it's actually duplicates the property and the value. Or we can use enum for statuses. Completed, in progress, to do, for example. And now my IDE helps me to understand the actual value of each of the properties. The most case scenario is when you got the status from the backend. Backend under the hood also uses an enum, which transforms to string. So in the most cases, we might want to use the same duplication that we have in the previous variant. So that's what comes first to the mind, and that's enums are actually widely used for such purposes. There is another variant. How can we achieve that? Is to create the type alias. Look into the following. Completed, in progress, and to do. And what it actually means? It means that the data that has the type to do status will only have one of three options, either completed or in progress or to do. And that's actually the great replacements for regular constants. Because this type, whenever, if you remember, so TypeScript to work in browsers will actually transform to the JavaScript. And the final version of your bundle will not include all this stuff like type or enum. Instead, it will transform to something. So, for example, interface will not go to the final build. It will be just omitted. The same will be for the type alias. It will not be there. However, enum will be transformed in a huge structure. It will be like the following. So it will be it will include the object where the keys are like the following, and then the extra thing, it will include the values as the keys. Well, something like the following, and so on and so forth. So actually, enum will be transformed to the huge structure to work with JavaScript. However, the type alias will be omitted. So that's why we came, at least for production variant, we came across that using type alias for such purposes will be great. Yes, and enum would need to be imported. Type would be suggested on the fly. Well, actually, the type alias should also be imported, but it will be omitted during the build. So to make the IDE showing user suggestions, the type alias should also be imported into the interface, for example, right? So let just me briefly explain. So if we include the status here, and let's assume this type alias is located somewhere else, we still need to import it. However, if we work just with 2D model, we will not need to import this as well, as you mentioned. Instead, it will suggest you all these three values. Okay, so why not? We could keep the status. Well, just for your reference. Enum will leave just for your reference as well. Let's keep this type alias. Why not? Just to demonstrate how it will suggest. And of course, we need also to make some adjustments here. Let's include status, and the status will be. Yeah, you see, it suggests me the variants. It's to do, then it's completed, That's one, let be in progress. So now it's okay. I heard about const enum that can be removed in the build. Well, I'm afraid I'm not sure. Perhaps I didn't get you. So we could see to what it transformed the regular enum. So perhaps if you could provide more specific examples, so that would be great. We could try to include enum into the playground to see to what it will be transformed. And you see that in JavaScript, it will look like the following. Okay, that's things was quite updated. And if we include something like the following, so it will be the same. Okay, so if we try const enum statuses, yeah, we see. Well, at least because I haven't used enum so much in my project, instead I used type aliases. So I haven't encountered it, but thanks for noticing. Well, as you see, it's been omitted, but still, we can refer to the values. Okay, that's really great, and that's the power of making the comments on the fly. Okay, I'll leave it for your reference here. For you to remember, and I will remember as well. Great. Let's get back to the work. So here is our mock list. So then we would like, that would be great to move the rest of the methods down below the actual hooks. Then let's submit our new item. I will do in the same way, just not to mutate not to mutate the existing array. So let's ID be this to do items length, then name this new to do item, and the status is to do, and that should be enough. Okay, let's see it have. It's not the type. Okay, maybe let's do more syntax. Let's list and then just include that's one. It's number. Okay, the ID is length. Okay, I got them. Name, new to the item. It's not the name, it's title. That's the cause. Okay, we submit it, and then we need to clear the input as well. Okay, then need to correct our form. select the following. Let's open the to-do item, submit button, and then inside the mod card, let's include our items. To do so, needs to iterate over all of the elements we have in the array. Is there is there any conventions about lifecycle hooks? For instance, implementation just after constructor or something like that. So ideally, there could be some nuances of having conventions that's usually discussed within the project, but the general recommendation is the following. First, to describe all the public properties, then list the private ones, then have constructor in case if it's needed, and then lifecycle hooks. I prefer having lifecycle hooks at the same order as it's going to be invoked. So here I see ng on init. Before I can have ng on changes. If I want to include after viewing it, so perhaps it will go right after ng on init, and ng on destroy will come as the last one. And then I would have the rest methods listed here. So first, as with the properties, right? So here are the public properties, then private ones. With the methods, we could keep the same. So first, we're listing the public methods. That's will react to the template, and then we'll have some private methods. Well, I believe the idea is quite simple. Okay. So let's return back to see what we have here. So, we need to iterate over all the elements that we have in our list. To do so, we have ng4, another built-in structural directive. The syntax is like the for loop in the JavaScript. First, we initialize the local variable and then of the iterable object. And here we want to so first let's include firstly the title, just to see whether it's okay. Yeah, it's okay, and it adds correctly. And we want to include the status as well. Well, that's could be quite complex one. So let's omit maybe the in progress one. We could address it later on. So perhaps we want to include some sort of checkbox. Material has it. So why not to include the checkbox as well? It will be the following. Hop. Checkbox. And now let's include it as well. It will be right here. Okay, that should be enough. It's ng4 to be moved here. And we could even move the label to here. Okay, and now we need to react to the changes. So the checkbox will be checked if the status is completed. So for such purpose, it has the property checked, or even better, it could react to the in the same way as the input does. We need to clear interval on destroy, right? Or Angular smart enough to handle it by itself. Well, actually, we will have to destroy every stream, everything that's runs or scheduled. Set interval is not an exception. So whenever the component is going to be destroyed, so we need to clean up all the schedulers, all the tasks that will run each time as well. Unfortunately, Angular is not smart enough to do so, so we need to do it manually. Okay, so it's something. So by the way, if you quite forgot the types that returns particular project, so we could refer to just highlight it. But for some reason it refers as Node.js timer, but okay, why not? And then we're cleaning up the interval. So yeah, if you have some schedulers in your component, so do not forget to clean up them as well. Yeah, thanks for noticing. Uh, okay. The checkbox. It will have item completed, but completed is something that should be Boolean, right? So having the status is not quite good. So let's have separate complete property just in case. Okay, and what we have here, we've just updated. It's lack of necessary property. Okay, now it's good. And we can submit a new items right here. Which is not completed, and that's okay. Well, we included the custom pipe in our example. I haven't included the custom directive. So that's perhaps a request for you to help me finding out where we can include the custom directive or what we can implement with the custom directive. And meanwhile, you're thinking, let's find out how can we distribute those elements into several components. So the idea is quite simple. So first, uh, uh, let's think on responsibilities that each element has. For example, the first section handles entering the username, and it's responsible for that. The next section show us the dashboard, the greeting. So other information could be included here as well, but let's unite it as the greeting. And the second section is to do. So potentially we will have three components here. And that's necessary. And whenever you're thinking on how can you distribute, how can you separate the layout into components, let's think on the responsibilities the component has. Ideally, each component should have one single responsibility. So, okay. So in our case, it will be three components. If you perhaps we could also take a look a bit at our markup with like to think on the responsibilities, right? So since we're more or less ready with our logic and so already have 1 hour and 20 minutes past, so let's pick up the rest of the time for component separation. And please also think on the custom directive we could implement here because we haven't included it, and most likely you also want to see how to deal with it. So please propose me something while I'm separating in breaking down the layout into components. So first, we agreed that we will have three of them. First, it will be name field. I'm going to create a component, so and place it right into the components folder. Let's will be user input. Then the third one will be greeting. The second one, sorry, and the third one, to-do list. Okay, we agreed to have three of them. So, and let's include, oh God, what's happening? Okay, let's include these pieces there. So first will come to greeting. Oh, no, sorry, that will be the user input. So let's just remove all the content from here. And as you might have noticed, each of the components has its prefix. The prefix is obligatory to have for each of the things for components or even directives that's created in your app. The prefix could be configured in the Angular JSON, and by the way, it has prefix app. You could define any if you want, and whenever you generate something using ngCLI, it will use the prefix right from the Angular JSON. Okay, so let's see. First, it will be greeting. User input. Second will be greeting. So let's move right here. And then the to-do list. It's more complex one. And here will be our to-do list. Okay. Here we'll include greeting. And here the to-do list. And now we see that's how the root layout has been transformed. So now it's much easier to read, to identify what kind of elements we have. So now let's keep going and organize the interaction. So first, let's start with the user input. Right now, it lacks of the property to bind within the input and something that should be thrown outside so that our app component will be aware of the latest changes. So first, let's include the user input right here. Okay, now it requires the method created, and to tell the outer component that we have changed the name, it should have the output binding. Our custom event it will emit string. And pay attention that event emitter has been imported from the Angular core. I know that in some cases it could propose the different places from where you could include it, but just to remember that the right event emitter that needs to be as an output binding comes from the Angular core. Okay, then we want to emit that. Okay, we want to include this. Okay, we're done with the user input. Then, okay, let's see. We want to leave the logic for getting the name here. Let's assume that app component is our page, which consists of the core logic, and we want to preserve it here. So let's include it as the input property. And it will be the following. So let's preserve the name of the property. From the Angular core. Output is used so the parent component could get that data. Yes, exactly. So we're telling the outer component that we just entered the new username, we click submit, and we know we want the outer component to know which exact data we entered to proceed. And we can include any of the data, either primitive, like string, number, boolean, or some sort of complex object, or just not to include anything. In that case, in the generic, we want to include void. In case if we just want to throw an event without any data. But in our case, we're throwing string, so we keep it as is. Okay, or perhaps we do not need the input as because yeah, that's redundant. Okay, entered name. So looks like we still need this that property. But instead I would refactor it a bit into the current name. That will be more obvious. Okay, username submitted. Let's keep it. Current date will come to greetings. To do item, to do items, date interval. Okay, current date and date interval, that's perhaps something that needs to be included into greetings. So let's include here. Then we want to move this logic for updating the current time into the onInit right here. And we also want to include ng on destroy to clean this interval. Okay, and also greeting awaits for the name. So here the perfect place we can include input. So we're awaiting the data from the outer component. Okay. So for now we have every everything in terms of implementation for 2 of the components. So let's move the rest things. For sure, we want to move submit to do into the separate component right here. So it lacks of some data, but that's okay. We're moving right here. We do not need any of them. So that would be also great. Whenever you create the components, I know that by default it includes the lifecycle hook as well as the constructor, but that's great whenever it's not in use to clean up because it's not necessary. So ng on init, yes, it's neat here. Let's see. So now submit username will accept the string because we're going to transfer the data. Yes, and yeah, for now, I believe we're good to go. So now the app component has been simplified, and that's great. So it's worked as the hub for all of the components. So now we have everything in place. Let's see. Okay. So at least nothing has been broken too much. But let's see what we have in greetings. It's not current date, it's current name. So for now, current name has been empty, so at least we have no errors here. So let's bind everything together. So first we'll start with user input. It will throw an event called submit user. And we need to call submit username. Since we want to access the value that we passed to the event emitter, so we see we pass the enter name right here. To access it, we need to pass the argument called $event. And then we'll see that this event payload has the type string, and it will be passed right to our app component. Okay, it has been submitted, so we don't see it here yet because we haven't passed it to the next one. So to pass our name, we want to include the property binding with the current name. And now I see it has exactly the name that we've already passed. Okay, and then the to-do list is something separate. We do not need doing something here, but at the same time, so everything works as expected. Okay, so okay, with the directive, you can create something like validation directive for input to check if it is a string without numbers. So perhaps let's leave it now because we're already like out of the time. So the idea is like, I don't know, is the following. So I could just to show how to access the elements within the directive. For instance, let's cross out the text if we checked out the checkbox. Why not? So let's include this directive. And it will be task completed. Okay, we've created our new directive. Then, just in case, what is in the common if we compare component and directive? The common thing is both components and directives have a class that's work with the template. The only difference is that a component has its own template, which is located in the HTML file, rather than directive doesn't have its own template. Instead, we could attach the directive to an existing element. And then this item will have, this directive will have the template exactly where we attached it. And the class structure is the same. It also has lifecycle hooks like on init, after viewing it, and so on. So if we are creating a directive to work with the existing templates, so most likely we want to use after viewing it. Okay, so now to access the element, we want to use the following. We want to include the element reference here so that we could access it, and to change something in terms of styles, instead of doing the native DOM manipulation, instead we'll include renderer too. Why so? So Angular depends on a platform. There is this thing called platform. That's an abstract stuff that defines a set of methods that need to be invoked to work with elements, how to render them, how to change them. By default, so in the majority of cases, the Angular will work in browser. And if you are sure that your code will work only in a browser, so then you could include some native DOM manipulations like finding queries, finding an element by query selector, and then toggle some class, something like that. But if you want your code, so your Angular code to work with the different platforms, so instead of using the platform native calls, use the abstract ones. So regardless the platform, you can still use elements ref and renderer too. So first, since we're dealing with the completeness, we want to take something as the input. So it still has same input and output bindings. And so nothing specific in terms of having the directive class. It's the same. I would include the same property name as the directive name, just because with such we can do the following. Instead of writing another properties here, we could directly bind to that one. So element would be the element that contains directive. Yes, exactly. That's element ref will actually point at the element where the directive exactly attached. Right now we have attached to the mat checkbox, and it will come here. If we refer to the exact type, so by the way, if you want to inspect the properties of the building classes, so you could redirect right into the typings, and we will see that the element ref has the property called native element, and that one will be actually the DOM element, the native DOM element with which we can interact. So after we knitted the view, and we want to do the following. So render set style to what? To this native element. Style will be text decoration. Well, I propose to do the following. Let it be text decoration in case if it's completed line through, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, let's see. Text decoration, it will be underline. And if I'm not mistaken, here we also have line through. Yes, exactly. Something like that. And to call this on after view init and see what will happen. Yes, we see that the text has line through effect. However, if we click the checkbox, it will not be updated just because we call this change text style only on view init, and we do not listen to the input changes. So here is the right time to use on changes lifecycle hook. With the only stuff that's on changes will be called the first time right before the view has been initialized. So we will need to have to check whether this element has been initialized. Something like that. And now I see it works perfectly fine. It applies the line through effect for the text whenever we have changed the completeness of the task. And okay, so looks like the contact webinar is done, and it's actually done. That's it. I wanted uh, uh, to implement with you. So I believe that's right about to stop here with the implementation. So let's one more time review what have we accomplished today. So we created the clone of the momentum, the simplest clone that's ever been made. That's has personalized greeting depending on the current time. It prints the current time and has the simple to-do list for us to remind what we need to accomplish today. So in terms of the components, we've been working with components. We organized the inner component interaction by using input and output bindings. We also touched some built-in directives and pipes, as well as created the custom ones, and well, organized such simple applications. So we just created it from scratch. Okay, so I believe that's a high time to stop in terms of implementation here. So just in case, the recording will be uploaded to the YouTube, so you will not miss it, as well as the repository with what we have accomplished today will also be available on GitHub. So I will post another announcement to the Discord, so that you will not miss it, definitely. Okay, so I would like to ask you, are there any other questions left for today, or perhaps you want to raise some other topics to discuss? Okay, looks like no comments. So perhaps you're chatting. I will wait for a minute or two in case of no questions, so we will close in today's workshop. Okay, see, no one texted yet. So anyway, if still something is left in terms of questions, so do not hesitate to contact either in the chat or ping me directly so that we could discuss. So, okay, it looks like we're good to close today's workshop. Thanks everyone for your attention. I hope that would be useful to you and see you later.